Our guest speaker this afternoon is South African. Am I not correct? He's a graduate of mining engineering from the University of New South Wales, Australia. He graduated with an honors in law and honors in accounting from the University of Stellenbosch, South Africa. Great wine there. Oh, I'd love to study there. He holds a master's in law and a higher tax diploma from the University of Johannesburg. He completed the advanced MBA program at Harvard Business School. And prior to being located in the Philippines, he headed the growth team of Gold Fields as general manager for corporate development, with a key focus on identifying and negotiating growth opportunities in Australia and Asia. He also worked with the Gold Fields global legal team, negotiating and implementing various merger and acquisition transactions in countries including Ghana, Peru, Venezuela, Canada, the US, and South Africa. A few words about Gold Fields. Gold Fields is one of the world's largest unhedged producers of gold. Gold Fields has an attributable annualized production of 3.6 million gold equivalent ounces from 8 operating mines in Australia, Ghana, Peru, and South Africa. Gold Fields has an extensive and diverse global growth pipeline with 4 major projects in resource development and feasibility, with construction decisions expected in the next 18 to 24 months. It is reported that Far Southeast Gold Copper Project in the Philippines represents one of Gold Fields' best greenfields growth opportunities. Did the stock just go up another 50 centavos? Of Lepanto? In September 2010, Gold Fields signed an option agreement to acquire a 60% interest in the Far Southeast project. Following the signing of the option agreement, Gold Fields undertook due diligence, including drilling programs to confirm previous feasibility studies on the Far Southeast deposit. Ladies and gentlemen, to speak on the topic Sustainable Development Localizing Best Practices, please put your hands together and join me. Give a very warm welcome to the President and CEO of Gold Fields Philippines Corporation, Brett Mattison.
Good afternoon, and thanks very much for the invitation. Kevin's been hounding me probably for a year now. We've been around for a long time, in the Philippines, but I guess we were just waiting until we had vested interest and we had something tangible to say. So thanks very much for listening today. The standard waiver, which all New York listed companies have to, I'm not going to take you through it. So who is Gold Fields? And I promise I'm not going to make this a corporate presentation, so don't worry, I know you can all read the internet. But just to take you through some of the diversification in Gold Fields, starting, I guess, on the west, we have one operation, Cerro Corona in Peru. We signed that deal in 2003 and brought it into production in 2008. We also have the interesting Chuquipaka project, which is a joint venture, which I'll talk about in the next slide. Moving along, we've got Tarkwa and Damang in Ghana. I'll talk a bit more about Damang, but Tarkwa is a 1 million ounce producer, or was in its heyday. And then we move into, I guess, what's the cornerstone of Gold Fields' existence. Gold Fields actually turns 125 years this year. And interestingly enough, that's the same age as Johannesburg, which is where gold was obviously first discovered in South Africa. And it's quite fitting that the two share their 125th anniversary in the same year. Historically, South Africa has represented the base load of our production, but in time we've obviously followed an area of internationalization, and try to diversify our portfolio. We now have 3 mines in South Africa, as you can see, producing in the region of 1.7 million ounces, which is less than 50% of our portfolio, and that will continue to decrease as we diversify further around the world. Agnew and St Ives, both in Australia, together they produce in the region of about 650,000 ounces, with St Ives producing about 400,000 ounces. So all in all, I mean, in terms of production, 3.7 million ounces from 8 mines. The interesting thing for me is obviously the size of the resource and the reserve. In terms of reserves, we're number 3 in the world. But in terms of resource, we head up closer to number 2, which is good, and it shows a long-term sustainable portfolio for Goldfields. Into growth now. Goldfields about 3 years ago decided, or 4 years ago, decided that we'd really focus on growth opportunities through exploration and development. And we really went onto an active campaign of promoting exploration and development projects. And we've really seen the fruits come through. We've got an interesting joint venture property in Chuquipaka. It's about an 8 million ounce resource at the moment with our partners Bonaventura. They are well-known Peruvian family. We hope to make a decision on that later this year in terms of bringing that into production, and that will be a nice addition to our Cerro Corona operation. We then move across to Mali, where we have the Yanfalila operation. Well, it's not really an operation. It's a series of open-pittable or potential open-pittable resources. We'll probably have some sort of toll treatment agreement that will get us up to about 200,000 ounces a year. We then move up into the cold of Finland. We've had APP, which is the Arctic Platinum Partnership, for a period of about 11 years now. It's been through its ups and downs. It's had metal price difficulties. It's had processing difficulties. But it seems as though we've found ways to unlock that, both through the use of Platsol, which is a newly, well, it's not really new, but we're running pilot plants at the moment, a way to extract more of the palladium and platinum without being degraded by the other deleterious metals in the ore. And then also the metal prices. It's a palladium-rich deposit, so with palladium prices going up, it's become a lot more viable. So that'll be an interesting addition. And then moving down, as I mentioned, into Ghana, Damang Super Pit. We bought Damang in 2002. In fact, the year I started at Goldfield, the first deal we did. And that, when we bought it, it had 1.2 million ounces in reserve. The Super Pit alone now has 4 million ounces. So it's an extension of the existing mineralization and a good addition to the Goldfields fold. And then I guess last but not least is why we're here today, to talk about Far Southeast. And I'm not going to talk about it now, but we'll talk about it as we go. So that's really Goldfields in a nutshell. I guess we could go on for longer, but that would bore you all. We're here to talk about Far Southeast. So what is Far Southeast? Far Southeast is a world-class copper-gold porphyry system that exists, and we'll talk to the location and provide you a few pictures shortly. But as you can see, it's a typical gold-copper porphyry system, and excuse me, I'm not a geologist, so to all the geologists, excuse my lack of proper phrasing, but as you can see, you obviously have the feeder system here, which is your underlying porphyry. You have the Victoria veins, which would be your first intrusion, and it's the gold-rich veins that Lepanto are currently mining. The secondary intrusion is the Energite deposit that was mined historically by Lepanto, predominantly copper, high in arsenic. It's typical of that kind of system. And then underneath you have the feeder system that feeds it all, and that is what we're talking about here. That's Far Southeast. We spoke earlier about the discovery of Far Southeast in 1980. Mr. Dicini was obviously there, and Lepanto were heavily involved in that discovery. And since then, there have been a number of companies involved. a number of activities around it. Historically, there have been about 80 diamond drill holes stuck right into the far southeast deposit. I'll run through that in a bit more detail. But what we know, and I'll run through it in a bit more detail now, is it's big. We call it a bad deposit because it's better at depth, and it's only getting bigger. So we'll talk about it in a bit more detail. In terms of where it is, I mean, it's always important where a project is in terms of infrastructure, location, and access. Far southeast is located pretty nicely in terms of infrastructure. It has ready access to Baguio, which is 93 kilometers away by road. There's also a road up via Cervantes and through Taguden down into various potential port facilities, which make the shipping of concentrate a lot easier. 3,500 kilometers from Japan, 3,000 kilometers from Korea, 3,000 kilometers from China, all pretty good for marketing. In terms of other infrastructure, there are several power supplies here. Obviously, some of them support the existing operations of Lepanto, and they'll be fairly easy to lock into far southeast. So in terms of infrastructure and location, pretty good. I just included a few slides just to give you a picture of what it actually looks like up there and the work Lepanto have done historically. It's a pretty impressive mine. I always tell my wife it's the most pretty mine you'll find, somewhere where you'd take your wife to go and have a look, and I'm sure people who've been up there will attest to that. So that's the airstrip, 850 meters of daunting fun as you land in there, but that's it. You then have the tailings dam, which is built by Lepanto in far southeast. Pretty good standards, pretty good world standards, and audited internationally. Then, just talking now in a bit of detail, and for the geologists among the crowd, I just really wanted to reiterate what we saw. So what attracted us to far southeast, really? For the layman in the crowd, and that probably includes me, and I've had to be told, pink is good, pink is pretty, pink is good for gold resources, okay? So the pink here you see is very high-grade mineralization, and that's what we saw at the time. The interesting thing to note here, though, is you can see the blue, excuse the quality of the picture, and I'm kind of craning my neck to see it, but the blue drill holes are depicted here. The interesting thing to note about them is you'll see they're all vertical or subvertical. That means straight down into the heart of the ore body. Now, that's great, and it showed us that there was vertical continuity. So we knew that there was a monster down there and that there was good continuity vertically. But if you look at the drill hole spacing, and what we've done basically is take a bird's eye view. So if you're flying over the deposit, this is what you'd see with the black representing the historic drill holes. You'll see that the spacing between the drill holes is fairly large. Each of these blocks is 40 by 40 meters. So you're looking in some places where the spacing between them is up to 300 meters. Okay? This is a monster ore body. It has dimensions of probably a kilometer by a kilometer of solid mineralization. But still, you need to know what you're dealing with in terms of spatial continuity. And that's what Goldfields, in coming in, wanted to decide. They wanted to ensure that what they were seeing here, or what we were seeing here vertically, repeated itself on a spatial orientation as well, so that we could get an idea of the magnitude of what we were dealing with. So mindful of this, that's the deal. We entered into a joint venture, an option agreement with Lepanto and an offshore investor in September 2010. And it was subject to, obviously, 18 months of due diligence, which had in mind, and I apologize for not facing you. It's just a bit difficult to point backwards, so please excuse me. So it included underground drilling, surface drilling to verify the geotechnical considerations, and then obviously on the community side, we wanted to get a good feel. Lepanto had been operating in the region for what was 73 and a half years at that stage. We wanted to ensure that we could be comfortable entering into the Philippines. So we entered into an 18-month option agreement to acquire 60% interest, and that was also subject to an FTAA, which I'll talk about shortly. Now let's talk about some of the work we've done. Basically, the outline of the ore body is here, and that's a section view. So basically, if you cut the ore body looking straight ahead of you, that's what you'd see. You see the high-grade mineralization in the middle, the pretty colors in the middle. What we wanted to do really, as I've mentioned before, is we wanted to test the horizontal or spatial continuity of the ore body. We had seen the good results coming down, but we wanted to drill across the ore body and make sure that it all kind of lined up. And what we found was better than expected. Not only was the continuity there, the vertical lined up with the inverted holes, but I mean, we're looking at bonanza type deposits. You've got nearly a kilometer at 2 grams gold equivalent. This is really something special that we all have here. And it's just, yeah, it's really good to look at. Our geologists, every time we put this up, get too excitable. But, I mean, this is really special. The other thing we've noticed through the drilling, obviously, is we're getting the correlation in the middle. So the high grade is where the high grade's meant to be. But what we're seeing, interestingly, is the geologists, as you know, can't say stop. If they're still in mineralization, they're going to carry on drilling. And that's exactly what happened here with hole 1303. They went 400 meters past where they were meant to go. That's nearly half a kilometer. And we're still in mineralization. So this thing is big. It's open in every direction. And I think just the heat's going to stop us at the end of the day, just as we get down there. It's very big. This is a bit of a messy slide, so just excuse. I just want to really just take you through this, and I'll try and explain it as simplistically as I can, or at least the way it's understandable for me. The blue lines are obviously the historical Lepanto information. The red lines are our drill holes. What we're seeing here really is the patch here is the tons. Okay, so in any gold deposit, I mean, it's all about the grade and how many tons there are of it. At a cutoff of 0.8, which is 0.5 copper equivalent, you're dealing with something in the region of 1 billion tons of ore for 52 million ounces of gold equivalent. That's our target at the moment. If that converts into a mineral resource, it'll put it into one of the top 5 mineral resources in the world. So this is genuinely world-class, and this is all we're looking at. As I mentioned, it's open in all directions. The interesting thing for me, though, is here. Now, this is your ounces per vertical meter, and really looks at the quality of the ore body. If you look at the guts of the ore body, which is here, you're getting 75,000 ounces per vertical meter, which is really outstanding. But then, as you increase the cutoff grade, so in other words, as you become more selective in your mining practices, we're seeing not a big drop in tonnage, and not a big drop in the grade. So it's pointing to the quality of the ore body as well. And even when you go smaller to a cutoff grade of 3 grams per ton, which is highly selective mining, you're still getting very big chunks of mineralization at fantastic grades. So what it's saying is basically there are a variety of ways you can bring this potential mine to bear, and it supports both bulk and selective mining methods in terms of the quality of the ore body. So just an overall summary of where we're at, and this has been released into the public domain. We're looking at a exploration target of 52 million ounces. As I've mentioned before, we're looking at something that's about 1 kilometer underground. Now, in the Philippines, that's pretty deep. South African standards at 4.5 kilometers underground, that's not too bad. So, yeah, I think we're pretty well placed to be able to extract that. In terms of the mining, we're looking at anything from 4 million tons per annum. 25 is probably conservative. It'll probably go up if we look at bulk mining methods. Regardless of the method, there'll be twin declines and twin shaft developments, big money into the ground, a lot of lead time. In terms of processing, the beauty of this ore body is it's pretty clean, no deleterious materials, fairly easy to process. Conventional flotation circuit, which we run in Cerro Corona, so it's no rocket science here. And the initial results we're receiving not only confirm the Lepanto historical data, but actually improve on it. So we've seen copper recoveries in the region of 92 to 93%, and gold up at 88, which is really good for a porphyry system. And then in terms of infrastructure, we've spoken about. So mindful of all of that, in March this year, Goldfields elected to exercise 40% of its option. So Goldfields now hold 40% of Far Southeast Gold Resources, which holds the FSC deposit. And we have an option to acquire the remaining 20% when the FTAA is issued, which we expect later this year. Okay, now to the interesting part. I'd like to just talk generally about global opportunities and challenges. I'm mindful of what's happened over the last 4 months. Perhaps we were meant to talk today because we agreed on this in November, and the proverbial hit the fan in January, so here we are. But basically, I'd like to look at some stats of where we're going. I mean, we've all heard Mr. Pangilinan talking about it, but if you look at some of the stats, it's pretty overwhelming what this world is doing and where the world will be. You've got 3 million middle-class consumers. That means a lot more spending on consumer goods, more minerals, 50,000 more skyscrapers, 221 more cities the size of Chicago built in the next 12 years. Along with that comes obviously steel and steel production. I think the interesting thing, though, is investment. It's becoming more and more expensive to build. And what McKinsey are saying is that to meet the world's demands, we're going to need $1 trillion of investment to meet these demands. So that's the demand side. Then let's look at supply. Gold and any mineral, as we know, is finite in nature. It doesn't replenish itself. If only it did, we'd be a lot happier than we are today. But what you see there is really a risk profile that was drawn up by an independent socio-political advisor, Maplecroft. And what it does is it identifies the socio-political economic risks prevalent in various countries. Now, green is obviously good in terms of risk. Red is obviously bad. If you look at the green blobs, I mean, you have Australia, which is around. It's obviously there's a lot of competition there, and the opportunities there are few and far between. You head up into the northern hemisphere, and the EU is obviously fairly well regulated, but clear in terms of mining. The problem is it's over-regulated, and there are not enough resources there. You then fly over the Atlantic into North America, and what happens there, the quality of the assets, particularly, well, I mean, in Canada, they're mining some pretty low-grade stuff, as well as the competition. So how's the mining industry responded? We've got all these global demands. We need to produce. You're getting everyone going into riskier jurisdictions. You've got all the big names in all the tough countries. You've got Kinross in Russia, Rio Tinto in Mongolia, Barrick in Pakistan, Rio Tinto again in Zimbabwe, a whole host of big players in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And then in South America, you've got Anglo American in Venezuela, and then Colombia with Anglo Gold. So mining companies are being forced more and more into riskier jurisdictions to try and meet the demand. What else does it come with, though? You've got obviously a much greater emphasis on human safety. Goldfield's slogan is, if we cannot mine safely, we will not mine. The world has changed in terms of the value of safety and health, and mining has changed as such as well in the last 10 years. You know, from the building of the Panama Canal, 28,000 deaths that went I wouldn't say unnoticed, but fairly well unreported, into the great rescue attempt that was made through Marion Roberts and various others in Chile, rescuing those 33 trapped miners, which was around the world. I think it just shows you the level of commitment that now is being thrown into safety. The other then is obviously on the activism side. I guess, yeah, who's afraid of Twitter? We're all afraid of Twitter, especially in the second highest social networking country in the world. So, yeah, I mean, communities stop mines. And in terms of reputation, that's also become a consideration. So, what does that, all mean? We've also got these things, and I'm not going to talk about best practices today. We all subscribe to best practices. We're all guided by it. We fully agree with it, and I don't really want to talk about it in a lot of detail today because it's been done. But Gold Fields subscribes to all of these best practices, and it's making our business a lot more sustainable. But it is another challenge. So where are we? I mean, we're walking this road. We've got a lot of supply, demands. You've got demands on your minerals. You've got supply issues. You've got NGO scrutiny. You've got reputational issues. Political and social license to operate, community stop mines. You've got to comply with all the stringent legislation, international standards, and at the same time make money for your shareholders. It's not an easy world we live in, but the world has changed. And to me and to Gold Fields, and I guess to most of the mining industry, what is the only solution? The only solution is to make sustainable development part of our DNA. It's no longer a strategy, it's our way of doing business. And Gold Fields fully subscribes to that. And I know the mining industry in general fully subscribes to that, but I'm not going to preach to the converted in many respects. So I'd like to just give you a localized view of Gold Fields sustainable development in Peru. As I mentioned, we bought the Cerro Corona deposit from the Gubbins family in December 2003. The history, obviously, is it's very high elevation. Gold Fields prides itself as being the company that mines at 4,500 meters underground and 4,500 meters above ground. So it's very high elevation, extreme poverty, as you can see from the picture. People relied very heavily on subsistence farming. And being a mining area, there was a huge amount of distrust and negativity. It was one of Gold Fields' first moves into expanding its international portfolio. So from a sustainable development point of view, we looked at it as an opportunity to showcase what we could do and integrate sustainable development into the way we did things. So in Peru, and I mean, we'll talk about the model that's applied in the Philippines, but they spoke about the merging of social, environmental, and economic capital. These are just some of the examples. I mean, on the economic side, we targeted local employment, which most people do. I think the important thing, though, is we forged contracting companies, and there are now 65 active ones that are servicing the mine. On a social capital perspective, we entered into partnerships with local governments, and I'll talk about how we've done that in the Philippines as well. We pumped a lot of money into health and education. And then lastly, on the environmental side, we had agreements with the community not to draw water from their rivers, and we entered into a massive reforestation process. And what this has done is it's really helped turn that community around and really made Peru's a pretty tough place. I'm sure you've all read about, Humala's come in. There's a strong social side of things. There have been protests, blockades, and throughout it all, Cerro Corona's done a fairly good job of keeping operating. So the model worked, and it just shows that with the right amount of involvement, you can get it right. Okay, so let's localize it again and get into the Philippines. Now, I guess, none of us really need to talk too much about the difficulties and the problems faced in the Philippines. And we're not going to be so naive as to say that there aren't still going to be a lot of problems ahead, regardless of how we conduct ourselves. But what we have to do, and what we believed we had to do upon entry, was actually ascertain what needed to be done differently to try and give ourselves the best chance of success. Now, please don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating that this is, there's a guaranteed success, because I think we all know that there are issues that may run against that. But what we tried to do was really put in place a system that would give us the best chance of success. And it started with a team, obviously. We had Goldfields and Lepanto. We then invited a whole group of international and local experts. So it was headed up by our sustainable development independent consultants, Maplecroft. They're internationally widely regarded. We then had local input from BMP, Aircom, and then obviously some of the big technical advisors as well, and then the Goldfields SD group. So we got everyone together, and we followed a process which we're applying now to FSC. Excuse the elementary look of this, but this was the process. So step one really was to identify the risks. So we spent a lot of time in terms of desktop studies, interviews, talking to various people, identifying what the risks are in the Philippines specifically, where we were operating, and trying to really be true to ourselves and say, okay, well, what is the magnitude of the task we need to deal with? And what we came up with was a list, or I call it a dashboard, of 31 major issues, okay? And these are kind of in 5 buckets, as I call them. You've got community, environment, our own employees, operations, and license to operate. So this was the result, the end result of a 12-week process involving a lot of people putting their minds together, trying to address what the issues are. We came up with 31 dashboard items. The next step then was to determine the risks commensurate with each of the items. So what were more pressing issues to deal with? I still lose sleep at night, but I wouldn't sleep at all if I had to address all the issues and if we had to address all the issues. So I think the key was trying to understand, well, what are the hot issues to address now? What needs to start immediately and what can come later? So the key then was the determination of risks. And I guess what we have here is really, you've all seen risk maps, but on the vertical column here you have the risk, okay? So obviously the further you go up, the less risky it is. Down here in the bottom left-hand quadrant is your very risky jurisdictions. And then on the horizontal axis, you have management's proficiency to deal with the risk. So obviously what we wanted to do in the beginning was target where all the risk was and where we needed to put management proficiency to deal with each of the risks. What was more important to deal with at each stage? Now, I think the important thing to note, and we all saw the map in terms of political association, any particular risk, a low risk, any particular risk in a low-risk country would, by virtue of the fact that it's in a low-risk country, be higher up and therefore less risk. Higher-risk countries are, the same issue in a high-risk country is obviously going to be higher risk. Sorry, that's not really Logic 101, but that's what it is. And I think the point to recognize, though, is that even in some high-risk countries, you're never going to get out of this quadrant. But the idea is recognizing it and putting in place measures to address it. And that's what it's the realization from a global company that we actually need to learn to operate in these quadrants. And as much as we try, and yes, we're obviously going to try and push things out here, it's how well you manage the risk inside that quadrant that's important. So out of the dashboard, the 32 buckets are identified here. For obvious reasons, I haven't highlighted what each one is, but you see a lot of issues as you'd expect in the bottom quadrant, and a few potential opportunities there where we can get some traction. The last step then was to get everyone together and say, okay, these are the issues, these are the risks, how are we going to deal with them? What are we going to do? What's the team? How's it going to happen? We flew our whole Goldfields SD team here for a 2-week workshop, and we sat down and came up with recommendations for each of the dashboard items and each of the issues. And we came up with basically, how many? I think it's 641 recommendations. And those relate to, as you can see, I mean, you have the pillar, the issue, the action. So you'll see for any dashboard item, there can be, in some instances, there are up to 40. Who's responsible for it, who helps, and when you begin and when you end. And basically, that's the end result, is understanding the magnitude of the task and what needs to be addressed at what stage. So that's the process that's been followed at FSE, and we try and address the risk on that basis. Just finally, on a more localized level again, we've got to have a look at what we're actually doing. I mean, it's all very good and well to have some theoretical discussion about the potential way of doing things, but what we're doing. So in terms of FSC, and we've relied very strongly on our partner Lepanto, who've obviously been there for 75 years, and relied very strongly on them. The first thing we did as a team was to engage with the Benguet State University. We went out with 340 volunteers and did an independent house-to-house survey of all 7,346 households in the region of about 34,000 people to understand what the issues were. So what are the issues on the ground? What are the assets of the people? How I think mining companies often make the mistake of telling people what they need and giving people what the mining company thinks they need. The idea here is really trying to understand the people you're dealing with and trying to look at what they have rather than what they don't have. And what we then did was we worked with each of the 105 sitios, each of the 12 barangays, and with the municipal council, as well as the Benguet State University, to come up with a community development plan, which is actually a requirement for each of the municipal councils in any municipality. Off the back of that, we fine-tuned that plan and with stakeholders introduced that into the communities. And then we, as part of our continuous engagement, support those plans. The idea really is to give people, we call it planning for exit. It sounds very strange. Why would you plan to leave? But that's what we need to do. We need to plan to leave people in a better place than what they are before we arrive. So that's really our strategy here, and that's the way we've done things. So as a final slide, and just talking about the various things we need to look at in terms of sustainable development, but on the ground in terms of the community, we've got 12 key areas, and I'll just quickly take you through some of them. I realize everyone presents their community projects, and yeah, we're going to do the same, but I guess what I wanted to get across was that there's some method in the madness. We're trying to understand what's required on the ground, what the people have, and what's going to help our exit easier for the people on the ground. So if you walk through each of the 12, I mean, in terms of human, we have educational and health programs. The culture is very important. We're up in the Cordilleras, the people of the mountain, very, very important for them in terms of culture. We try to promote culture through music, dance, choirs, that type of thing. Community infrastructure to support their activities. On the information side, we've provided access to IT. I think at times my IT officer thinks I need more access to IT. But yeah, we've done that through the provision of computers and training, obviously, that goes with that. In terms of social, as I've mentioned, we've really tried to align very closely with friendly NGOs as well as regulatory and government institutions. So in a lot of them, we've hooked up, with the Red Cross, a single drop for safe water, who are running our water process, and obviously the universities and regulators. On the political side, we've obviously tried to engage, not get too involved, but engage. On the natural resources, as I mentioned, we have a WASH program. Financial, we've run financial management programs, teaching people how to manage their money. The important thing is, you know, with these royalties, you have a big cash injection into communities, and that has obvious knock-on effects. And unless people know how to manage correctly, you know, you're going to have a select few people with Ferrari dealerships on every corner, rather than, you know, coming up with what's really important and sustainable. On the security side, we hooked up with the Red Cross again and rolled out disaster and preparedness. In terms of organizational maturity, we obviously develop and support organizations within the community, including women organizations, which our team do really well. And then obviously on the reputational side, building a brand, building a name, and hoping to give ourselves the best chance of success. So that's Far Southeast. That's what we're doing from a technical point of view, from a sustainable development point of view, and thanks very much for giving us the opportunity to speak today. Thank you.
My name is Sinovio Shish. I'm with Citibank here in Makati, Philippines. And my question is related to the sustainability. Basically, what are the biggest environmental risks that you see drilling so deep into the ground, and how is the community responding to it, and what are your plans for that?
Challenges that we're looking at, especially up there, probably water quality, and you know, we've hired a lot of water experts. We've got our environmental manager is actually an expert in water management, and that's one of the reasons we got his expertise in. So yeah, it'll be groundwater, and then obviously the water that comes from the underground operations. As I mentioned before, there's potential for some of the deleterious minerals, and we're looking very closely at that with the community.
Everybody in the room basically is part of the choir that you're singing to. We all understand the benefits and the opportunities for the country and the people in responsible mining. But the elephant that's not in the room are the guys who object, the churches, some of the NGOs, people whose ignorance is as amazing as the potential for mining, responsible mining. Are these people not willing to come and talk to you guys in public at venues like this to ask their questions, so that you can try to satisfy their fears, their bigotry or ignorance? How do you get them into the picture? Because they will be there to block you, and that will be a shame.
Brian, I agree. It obviously would be a shame. I think the way is, you know, we need to go to them, and that's what we are doing. We're actively engaging with NGOs on the ground. We all know, obviously, there's certain fundamentalists that you're never going to turn and that are never going to change. And that's where, I guess, like TVI, you rely on your community to support you and dilute that influence. But I think you're right. They are one of our key stakeholders, and people that do need to be listening at the efforts that are being taken to ameliorate their issues and concerns. So are we engaging with them? Yes. In public forums? No. But we'll continue to engage with them. And like I said, we've got to really do our best to give this thing the best chance of success. Even what we've presented today, I mean, there are issues with it. We recognize we're not naive. There are issues ahead. But I think we all need to recognize that the NGOs are going to become key stakeholders, and we need to deal with how we address them and engage with them going forward. It's a good point.
Thank you, Brett. My name is Ramil, and we are into food production. You're probably wondering what we're doing here. So we want to provide healthy food to the miners and the communities. My question is basically, how is it possible that your company can help the communities you work with in terms of having them eat better food, or because you have resources and capacities to educate and create pilot projects for organic or healthy food lifestyle. So my question is, are you doing something to help people use because you mentioned asset-based resources, which means existing houses, existing fields which are idle, and people are idle but actually what they need is basically knowledge to turn these resources available into, say, mushroom production below ground, above ground. But what they need is basically training and a little bit of leading from your company. Are you working towards this direction?
Absolutely. I guess that there are two things. One is promoting healthy eating. We do that through our HR side, and obviously mainly for employees, and through our healthcare programs, which we roll out across all of the barangays. But I think what you're talking about more relates to livelihood programs and alternative livelihood programs, and that's the key to our planning to exit. We need to ensure that we provide opportunities to people on the ground to have alternative livelihoods and lifestyles. A good example is we've just seen and been involved with sending 3 students over to Japan to look at organic farming, and we'll sponsor that and look at that. I think the big key there is lack of land space. It's pretty very mountainous, so there's a lack. We need to. So as a team, we've got a livelihood specialist, and the focus really is to focus on alternative livelihoods and make sure that people have proper utilization of the limited resources that they have. So yes, we are looking at it. Thanks, Ramil.
Any other question? I can read mine now. Okay, I labored over this question.
Can you read my handwriting?
No, we didn't plan this question, but it all comes from the experience that we've had with Ambassador Albert. We've been to Indaba, and so we've had conversations with miners from your side of the world. But could you tell us what are the similarities between South Africa and the Philippines in terms of doing business in the mining industry? And what are the differences? And is there anything we can learn from the South African way of doing things that we could apply to the Philippine setting to improve the way we do things in the mining industry?
I think broadly speaking, and in a broader context, I think there are a lot of similarities between South Africa and the Philippines, full stop. Both in terms of the social structures, the way things are done. I mean, it's not all the good things. There's some irritations that are kind of similar in both jurisdictions. But in terms of South Africa's closeness to the Philippines, yes, I think South Africa has been built on mining. It's been a major contributor, but it's also taught us a lesson, is that those resources are waning now. And it's taught the mining industry a very good lesson of how to leave behind something when you do exit. In terms of technical specifications, obviously the depth, the heat. Far southeast, I didn't really go into too much detail. It's pretty hot down there. It's close to the heart of volcanic activity, so it gets pretty hot pretty quick down there. So technically, our mines also at 4.5 kilometers get very hot, about 80 degrees centigrade. So there are definitely synergies there. In terms of the social complexities, very similar as well. Social issues are the same. And then also on the health and educational side, the potential lack of that and quality of that. So yes, I do think there are similarities between the two, and I think if you look at the South African economy and the potential of the Philippines economy, as highlighted earlier, I think we can definitely learn from each other.
Thank you, Brad. Yes, Peter. One last question.
There has been quite a lot of controversy on the environmental side, but a critical issue is that the government is not getting enough revenues out of mining. This is the complaint. And the IMF had a team here for the last couple of days looking into this. Can you tell us, in South Africa, I'd be particularly interested, but Southeast particularly, what sort of revenues are you contributing to governments elsewhere, and in what kind of percentages? compared to the amount that you keep for yourselves?
I can't give you exact details now. Let's just contextualize that. I think there's a global move in all countries to try and get more. I mean, we've seen it in all the jurisdictions that we're operating in. Australia had their go in 2009. We then have Peru. Ghana's having their go now. I think it's a global trend. We've just seen what's happened in Indonesia. So I think it will continue to be more and more of a trend. Before I get into the specifics of goldfields, I think the key to any engagement, and what we've seen in other jurisdictions, is active engagement with affected people. My biggest concern is the fact that you have these one-sided dictatorial statements that are made, particularly in places recently such as Indonesia. Mongolia was such as well, with their windfall tax in about 2007, that don't really take into account the true interests of the people that they're affecting. So I think that's important. From a goldfield specific perspective, in Peru, the look-through rate is in the region of 42%. South Africa, you probably have something in the same region. Ghana, they're trying to increase it a bit more. That'll look to, when I say look-through, I mean that's your excise tax, your income tax, everything like that. To put it into perspective, in the Philippines, under the FTAA regime, it's 50%, 50. That's what it is already.
50 of what?
50 of your underlying profit.
Yeah, of your profits.
Yes, but I mean that's what I'm talking about in terms of your effective tax rate.
But that needs to be clearly explained to people, I think, and it's not fully understood at this point. We hear a lot of this, you're only paying 2% excise tax, the government is getting nothing, etc. But the inputs that I've had, the information I have, is that 50-50 is a fair sharing that mining companies are willing to accept, but it's a fair sharing of the net profit in whatever way you construct it. When I talked to the IMF, I tried to explain this. If you have an excise tax, if you have local taxes, if you build a school, that's part of your taxes, because the government should have done that. All those things should be thrown into that 50-50. But I've had a very hard time getting specific numbers from companies that I can actually quote into the public arena to defend that you are in fact paying quite a large amount of tax. And I think we need to do a better job of getting across the message of what we really are paying in taxes.
I would agree, and I think our friends through the Chamber are currently doing that survey, as are we, and we're going to be releasing those results shortly.
When I was envoy for mining, after I was Secretary of Foreign Affairs, I went around and saw how many women are really engaged in the industry. And I've been witnessing a lot of anti-mining women. So I said, where are the women? Where are they not answering what's going on in their respective industries? So we, with a number of other women lawyers, women geologists, women mining engineers, women HR workers, etc., decided to get together, have a lunch, and decided to come out of that lunch as the goddesses of the mountains. We call ourselves Diwatas. And we would like to put a human face to this debate. So we're gathering data insofar as how many women are really engaged in the industry, how many children are being affected by the industry. This may help in the debate because right now there is a study being made by one of the major countries that is involved in mining in the Philippines, and they're very, very eager to know what's going on with the gender issue in the mining industry. They came in with a statement saying that they are the worst affected, they are suffering from the industry, etc. So I think that this is one of the agenda that is going to be taken up by the Diwatas. We're going, anybody of the ladies and the gentlemen who may be prepared to sit down with us after this session, the brave gentlemen, we invite you to sit down with us at a table and we'll tell you about our plan to launch the Diwata movement with a fantastic show of Philippine gold jewelry. So I thought that would be a soft diplomacy approach to this debate on what do we get out of the mining industry, etc. And our chief Diwata is no other than Agnes. She is the ambassador from South Africa. And I couldn't help it, Brett, but I always use the words of Nelson Mandela when we talk about mining. He said in one of the conferences I've attended that to alleviate poverty, you have to create wealth. And to create wealth, you have to use your natural and human resources. I thought that, in essence, is what mining is for South Africa, and I hope for the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you very much.